While I was lying in my hospital bed preparing for surgery, I heard a whisper. Once she signs the papers after surgery, the house is ours. She won't fight back, she'll be too weak. Those were the words I heard my own son whisper to his wife in the hallway. My name is Margaret, I'm 66 years old, and in that moment my blood froze. The heart monitor beside me kept beeping steadily, but inside I was collapsing. I realized I wasn't just giving life, I was about to be robbed of it. If you're hearing my story now, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far my story of betrayal and revenge has traveled. My name is Margaret Ellis. I am 66 years old, and I always believed a mother's strength was measured in the small routines of everyday life. That morning felt no different. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the kitchen, the old radio hummed a familiar tune from my youth, and I set the table carefully, waiting for my son to join me. It was the kind of ritual that once brought me peace, or so I thought. Then I heard voices in the hallway. At first, only a muffled whisper. Then a quick laugh, sharp and uneasy. I recognized his tone, my son's, but the second voice stopped me cold. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law. What I heard next stole the air from my lungs. They were talking about me, not with love or concern, but as if I were an obstacle to be removed. Once she signs the papers after the surgery, we'll sell the house. She won't make it through, and even if she does, she won't have the strength to fight. Their words cut into me like knives, each syllable twisting deeper. My blood froze. The floor vanished beneath me, as though everything I had sacrificed for them had been ripped away in a single merciless breath. In that instant, I realized the love I thought was unbreakable was nothing more than a mask for their greed. I leaned against the cold wall of the kitchen, my hands trembling around the warm porcelain. Every word they spoke was an invisible wound, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. What they did not know was that the woman they had cast as a victim had learned, far too late, never to die in silence. And in that moment, with my heart pounding like thunder in a cage, I decided I would not be discarded. The first move would be mine. I remembered the years that brought me to that kitchen, the weight of choices made long before that morning. I was 24 when I held Daniel for the first time, his small fists clenching the air, as though even then he wanted to take hold of the world. I promised myself that no matter how little I had, he would never know hunger, nor would he ever feel abandoned. That promise shaped every day of my life. When my husband, Robert, died suddenly of a heart attack, Daniel was still in high school. I took extra shifts at the library, sorting through dusty archives and teaching children how to find stories among forgotten shelves. I often came home after dark, my body aching, but I still cooked his favorite meals and sat beside him until he fell asleep. Every sacrifice was justified by the belief that he would grow to honor what had been given. There were moments when that belief felt rewarded. I remember his college graduation, standing in the heat of a Texas summer, sweat dripping down my neck as his name echoed across the stage. He hugged me tightly, whispered, "Thank you, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you." For a brief second, I thought all the nights of exhaustion had been worth it. That memory had been my anchor, until the words I overheard twisted its meaning into mockery. The decline came years later, disguised as ambition. Daniel entered real estate with a hunger I mistook for drive. He and Rebecca bought more than they could afford, cars polished to a shine, dinners in restaurants I could never pronounce, vacations captured in smiling photographs. But behind the images was a debt that grew like mold in the dark. When he told me about the diagnosis, cirrhosis brought on by years of quiet recklessness, I chose not to see the irony. I only saw my son in need. The doctor explained the risks. At my age, surgery would not be easy. But when they asked if I wanted to be tested as a donor, I said yes, without hesitation. I imagined that offering a part of my body would prove once and for all the depth of a mother's love. I convinced myself that the bond between us could be restored by blood and flesh, as though stitching myself into him might repair the fractures of our history. Now, as I replayed the whisper in the hallway, those illusions shattered. What I believed to be sacrifice was only convenience for them. I had mistaken dependence for devotion, need for love. They had been planning not just for my son's survival, but for my erasure. My heart trembled with rage, but my face remained calm. I knew then that the story was far from over, and the ending would belong to me. The hallway outside my room felt like an echo chamber, every sound magnified by the stillness of the hospital. Joshua appeared at the door, his face pale and his hands trembling around a phone he gripped as if it might burn him. He said, "Grandma, I need you to hear this." His voice cracked with a mixture of fear and urgency, and in that moment, I knew my grandson carried a burden far heavier than any boy his age should bear. He pressed play, and the voices filled the sterile air. Daniel's voice came first, steady but laced with greed. "Once she signs the papers after surgery, the house is ours." Then Rebecca's laugh followed, sharp as glass. "She won't fight back. She'll be too weak." Each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of the love I had once believed was indestructible. My pulse raced as the heart monitor beside me betrayed the storm inside. I looked into Joshua's eyes, and in them I saw not only sorrow, but loyalty. He whispered, "I didn't know what to do. I heard them, and I had to record it. I didn't want to keep this from you." His confession struck me with both pain and pride. Pain because he was forced to see the ugliness of his parents, pride because he chose truth over silence. That boy was more of a man than the one who had raised him. The weight of the phone in my hand felt like a weapon disguised as glass and metal. I played the recording again, letting the words sear into me until the sting of betrayal transformed into something else. Clarity. This was not just treachery, it was evidence. Evidence that they saw me as disposable, evidence that they planned to erase me from my own life. For the first time in years, I felt the cold satisfaction of power returning to me. I took Joshua's hand and told him, "Thank you for being brave enough to tell me. You have given me a gift, even though it hurts." His fingers tightened around mine, and I could feel the desperate hope that maybe I could still make things right. I promised him that the truth would not be buried in the same grave they had dug for me. My voice was calm, but inside I was already planning my first strike. As the recording ended, silence hung heavy between us. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, but my heart had already shifted into a new cadence. The betrayal was no longer a wound, it was fuel. I knew what they wanted, and I knew how to use it against them. Their plan would collapse under the weight of their own words, and I would be the one to bring the collapse down. I closed my eyes and steadied my breathing, letting the machines hum around me like an unintentional choir. Nurses passed by the door, glancing briefly at my chart without suspicion. To them, I was only another patient waiting for surgery, fragile and compliant. They did not know that inside me, betrayal had awakened something sharp, something calculating. Silence became my armor, and I wrapped it tightly around me as if it were a second skin. Joshua sat at the edge of my bed, his knuckles white as he clutched the phone. I whispered, "Go to the waiting area and keep this recording safe. Do not let anyone near it until I say so." His eyes widened, unsure if he should leave me alone, but I squeezed his hand. "Trust me," I said, my voice low and steady. He nodded reluctantly and slipped out of the room, disappearing into the sterile corridor. Moments later, Daniel entered with Rebecca close behind. Their faces carried forced smiles, the kind reserved for photographs and polite strangers. Daniel said, "How are you feeling, Mom? You don't have to worry about anything. Just relax." His words rang hollow, and Rebecca added, "Soon this will all be behind us." I smiled faintly, concealing the fire burning beneath my calm expression. They believed they were speaking to a weakened woman. I allowed them to believe it. Inside, I rehearsed every detail of their downfall, but outwardly I kept my voice measured. I told them, "I just want to pray a little before the surgery." Rebecca touched Daniel's arm, eager to leave, and he nodded. "We'll give you a moment, Mom," he said softly, before ushering her toward the hallway. The door closed gently, and their footsteps faded, leaving me alone with the weight of both betrayal and possibility. I pressed the nurse's call button and requested to speak with the hospital's patient advocate, disguising my urgency as a simple need for reassurance. When she arrived, I leaned in close and explained that there were documents I would not sign until I reviewed them carefully. My voice carried the tremor of a woman facing mortality, but my eyes locked with hers told a different story. She understood enough to pause, and that was all I required. As I sank back against the pillows, I felt the strength of my silence. I had not shouted, I had not confronted, but already the first thread of their plan had begun to unravel. They thought they controlled the stage, but they did not see the curtain rising on a performance of my own design. The reckoning would come, not with noise, but with the quiet certainty of a trap closing. The silence I had chosen was not surrender, it was preparation. In the hours before the surgery, my mind sharpened with every heartbeat, weaving threads of strategy from the chaos of betrayal. The recording Joshua had given me was more than evidence, it was leverage. With it, I could strip Daniel and Rebecca of the false security they cloaked themselves in. I no longer felt like a victim awaiting the knife. I felt like the one holding it. I requested another meeting with the patient advocate, careful not to reveal too much. I told her, I want all documents removed from my surgical file until I review them personally. She hesitated, unused to such defiance from a woman my age. But when our eyes met, she nodded slowly. I had carved the first crack in the foundation of their plan. Control, once theirs, was quietly slipping back into my hands. Alone again, I pulled my phone from the drawer beside my bed and dialed Helen Porter, my oldest friend. She had spent her career as an attorney, fierce even in retirement. When she answered, her voice was steady, and I whispered, "Helen, I need new papers drafted immediately. Revocation of power of attorney, a provisional will, emergency measures." She asked no questions, only promised action. In her, I found not just loyalty, but the legal shield my vengeance demanded. As I hung up, the plan solidified. Daniel and Rebecca had counted on my compliance, on a signature delivered under sedation, on my trust turned against me. Instead, I would give them a performance worthy of their schemes. I sent Joshua a message, instructing him to meet Helen in the hospital lobby and carry my identification, ensuring the documents would be completed before the hour was through. Every piece was moving into place. When Daniel returned later, his tone was thick with false tenderness. He said, "Mom, you must be scared, but everything will be fine." Rebecca lingered behind him, her smile polished yet hollow. I clasped his hand, letting my eyes glisten as though fear consumed me. In truth, my heart beat with anticipation. They mistook my composure for weakness, not realizing they were already standing on the stage I had prepared, and the audience would soon see them for who they truly were. That evening, as the lights in the ward dimmed and the corridors fell quiet, I rehearsed the final steps. The confrontation would not come in anger but in precision. Their greed had led them to believe the house and my life were theirs to claim. I would show them the truth in front of witnesses, under the harsh glare of hospital lights. By morning, they would learn that betrayal can write its own sentence, and I would be the hand that delivers it. If you believe betrayal deserves a reckoning, hit the like button now. Justice, when it comes, is never accidental. It is planned. The next morning arrived cloaked in a tense stillness, as though the hospital itself anticipated what was to come. Nurses wheeled carts past my door, their voices hushed, their steps brisk, but none of them knew the storm I carried within. I had rehearsed every detail through the night. No rage, no trembling hands, only calm precision. By the time Daniel and Rebecca arrived, my face carried the serenity of a woman who had already made her choice. Daniel leaned down, brushing my forehead with a forced tenderness that only sharpened my disgust. He said, "Mom, everything is ready. After this, you won't have to worry again." Rebecca stood behind him, her smile thin as paper, eyes darting to the documents she expected me to sign. I smiled faintly, nodding as though gratitude filled me. In truth, it was satisfaction, for the curtain was about to rise on their carefully constructed lie. I told them gently, "Before the surgery, I want a family photograph. It would mean a lot to me." Rebecca lit up, eager to secure a final image of her supposed triumph, and Daniel agreed immediately. The nurse on duty arranged for us to meet in the main lobby, where light poured through high glass windows and visitors moved freely. It was the perfect stage, public, open, impossible for them to escape without exposure. When we gathered in the lobby, Helen was already there, documents in hand, Joshua standing firmly by her side. I clasped Daniel's arm, feigning fragility, while Rebecca adjusted her hair for the photograph. The nurse lifted her camera, waiting for us to gather closer, but instead of posing, I reached for Joshua's phone. The recording burst to life, Daniel's voice filling the lobby with its poisonous promise. Once she signs the papers after surgery, the house is ours. The room fell silent. Rebecca's face drained of color, and Daniel stammered, "Mom, it isn't what it sounds like." But the laughter of Rebecca followed on the recording, undeniable, damning. "She won't fight back, she'll be too weak." Heads turned, whispers spread, and the nurse froze mid-motion, the phone still recording the scene. I placed the legal documents into Helen's hands, my voice steady as I announced, "These revoke every power you thought you held. You own nothing of me." Daniel reached for my hand, desperation twisting his features. "Mom, please, you don't understand." But I did understand. More than he ever realized. The betrayal was complete, the trap sealed. I stepped back, my voice rising just enough to carry across the hall. "Everyone here deserves to know what kind of son I raised, what kind of woman he married. Let them see you for what you are." Their empire of lies had crumbled in a single moment, and it was I who struck the match. The silence that followed the recording was louder than any scream. Visitors in the lobby shifted uneasily, nurses exchanged startled glances, and a doctor paused mid-step to stare at us. Daniel's face flushed crimson, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Rebecca tried to plaster on a smile, but it cracked under the weight of dozens of eyes. The air was heavy with judgment, and they could not hide from it. Rebecca was the first to speak, her voice brittle. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, forcing a laugh that only deepened the tension. But the advocate who stood beside me shook her head slowly, confirming that the recording was authentic and stamped with a timestamp matching the previous night. The truth could not be unraveled. Each word they had spoken in private now lived in the open, poisoning the image they so carefully guarded. Daniel lunged forward, trying to grasp the phone from my hand. "Mom, delete it. This is family business," he pleaded, his desperation echoing across the polished lobby floor. I pulled my hand away with surprising strength, glaring at him. "Family business," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Family does not plan the burial of the living." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Daniel stumbled back, humiliated by the venom in my calm tone. The hospital staff began murmuring among themselves, their voices carrying fragments of judgment, unethical, cruel, manipulation. One doctor approached, reminding Daniel that such behavior could lead to a re-evaluation of his transplant candidacy. The color drained from his face as he realized the consequences were no longer confined to our family. His survival now hung in question, not just because of his illness, but because of his actions. Betrayal, once whispered, had turned into a public sentence. Rebecca tried one last time, her words sharp and frantic. "She's confused, she doesn't know what she's saying." But Joshua stepped forward, his voice strong, his hand steady. "I recorded it. I heard everything. Don't you dare call her confused." Pride surged through me as my grandson stood taller than his father had ever managed. In that moment, I saw the legacy I had chosen, not in Daniel's greed, but in Joshua's courage. As security moved closer, Daniel lowered his eyes, finally breaking beneath the weight of exposure. His empire of lies had collapsed in front of strangers, stripped of sympathy and authority. I stood straighter than I had in years, my hands no longer trembling. For decades I had carried his burdens, his failures, his debts. But now, for the first time, I carried only the truth. And the truth was heavy enough to crush him. When the crowd finally dispersed, the weight of silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of consequence. Daniel sat hunched in a plastic chair, his hands pressed against his face, refusing to meet my eyes. Rebecca hovered nearby, whispering frantically into her phone, desperate to salvage an image that could no longer be repaired. Their voices, once arrogant, were reduced to fragments of panic and despair. I felt a strange calmness, like the quiet after a storm when the debris still litters the ground. I knew the damage had been done, and yet there was no triumph in watching my son crumble. Victory had its own bitterness. The boy I had once carried in my arms now sat defeated, exposed not by an enemy, but by his own greed. That truth was heavier than I expected, pressing against my chest. The hospital's patient advocate approached me gently, her voice measured. She said, "Mrs. Ellis, we will be filing a report regarding what was revealed here today. His candidacy for surgery will be reviewed." I nodded slowly, acknowledging her words. Daniel looked up then, his eyes wide, filled not with remorse, but with terror at the possibility of losing both his inheritance and his chance at survival. He had gambled everything, and the price had arrived sooner than he imagined. Later that evening, Joshua sat beside me in my room, his presence a balm against the bitterness. He said, "Grandma, you did the right thing. They can't hurt you anymore." I took his hand, studying the shape of his fingers, so much like mine once were. I whispered, "The right thing always comes with a cost." He tilted his head, not fully understanding, but one day he would. Betrayal never leaves a soul untouched, not even the one who survives it. As night fell, I stared out of the hospital window, the city lights blinking against the dark sky. I had offered my flesh to save Daniel, and in return he had tried to erase me. Now another would receive that gift of life, someone who deserved a chance at survival without strings of deception attached. That thought steadied me. My sacrifice would not be wasted, even if it would no longer be for the child I once protected. The truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had won, but the cost of winning was solitude. My son was no longer my son. Rebecca was no longer family. What remained was Joshua, and the knowledge that justice, though painful, had been served. I whispered to myself, I gave life, and I defended my own. Both were acts of survival, though only one was born from love. The other was born from vengeance, and I carried both within me now. The morning after the confrontation, the hospital corridors felt different. The same sterile walls and flickering lights now carried a sense of finality, as though the building itself had witnessed too much to remain neutral. I walked slowly, my body weaker than it once was, but my steps steadier than the night before. I had shed the weight of their lies, and in doing so, I had uncovered the strength of my own truth. Daniel did not visit me again. I learned from a nurse that he had left the hospital quietly, avoiding the eyes of those who had seen his downfall. Rebecca followed him, her whispers replaced by silence, her schemes shattered under the weight of exposure. Their absence did not wound me. It freed me. What once felt like abandonment now felt like the natural consequence of betrayal, the severing of ties already long dead beneath the surface. Joshua remained. He brought me water when my throat was dry, adjusted the blanket when the cold crept in, and sat silently when words were too heavy to speak. He reminded me of the love that still lived within my family, a love uncorrupted by greed. One evening, he said softly, "Grandma, I'm proud of you." For the first time in years, I believed pride could exist between generations without the poison of manipulation. When the doctors confirmed I would not donate my liver to Daniel, I felt no regret. Instead, I asked that my place be given to another on the waiting list. Somewhere, a stranger would wake with a new chance at life, and that, I realized, was enough for me. I had been willing to sacrifice for my son, but when that sacrifice became a tool of betrayal, I chose to give it to someone worthy of hope. Lying in my hospital bed, I reflected on the arc of my life. the sacrifices, the betrayals, the final act of resistance. Love and vengeance had braided themselves together, inseparable, yet distinct. I had learned that survival was not only about keeping breath in my lungs, but about keeping dignity in my soul. My story was not one of defeat. It was the story of a woman who refused to die in silence, even when silence was demanded of her. And so I tell my story now, not to beg for pity, but to leave a mark. Betrayal is a fire that consumes, but truth is the ash that remains. My blood was nearly stolen, my home nearly lost, yet I walk away with something greater than either: the knowledge that I fought back. If my words reach you tonight, remember this: when the ones you love turn against you, your silence is not surrender. It is the moment before your voice becomes power.